And we're back in the car like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of this still chilly Monday afternoon here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Unbelievably, incredibly, because I remember pretty clearly when this movie came out, today marks 35 years since the release of what was dubbed at the time, and this is not something that time has shifted. This was true when it hit, and it's still true today. The first movie blockbuster, and I don't mean the video store, but the first blockbuster of what I believe to be the greatest movie decade, the 90s. Released on March 3rd, 1990, was John McTiernan's adaptation of Tom Clancy's insanely runaway best-selling novel, The Hunt for Red October. And there is the best-selling angle aspect of this story. The fact that Clancy's book was an incredibly hot property around Hollywood, and who's going to do it, because I believe the book was released in 1984. And everybody just lapped it up. It was a literary success, and by that I mean the critics really liked the book. This was not Bridges of Madison County, 50 Shades of Grey, where you have people going nuts over how incredible a book is when the book is really not really that great. But on top of that, Tom Clancy's book was so canny, and he seemed to be very predictive with what he came up with in the story. Allegedly, the Secret Service and the CIA were very interested in the book because they thought, and whoever the they is, I don't know exactly if the they was the head of, William Casey, head of the CIA, William Sessions, FBI. I don't know who the they was, but there is some version of a they. They read Tom Clancy's book and became convinced that he was somehow either an insider, double agent, triple agent, or he had been tipped off by somebody deep within the government. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but the guy was questioned, and whoever the they was, because they questioned him, you can Google this, you will read the phrase, they questioned him. The satisfaction was that, well, not satisfaction, he gave satisfactory answers. He wasn't going to be in trouble. I think they were genuinely curious, but it's bizarre that they would go that deep and be convinced this guy must be either working for us or maybe he's working for Lithuania. All of this fucking bullshit. Nowadays, this would have been a much bigger story, but back then in the Stone Ages of the mid-'80s, this is something that wasn't really reported on a large scale. I don't even know if it was reported when the movie came out. So Tom Clancy simply was reading the tea leaves of the era, of the so-called Cold War era, when he wrote his novel. And the movie version, I haven't read the book. My dad read it. He liked it. Dad actually liked the movie more than the book. But he read it when it first hit softcover, again, circa mid-1980s, I believe. But Clancy's book, even though it is a Cold War story, it is a story of potential nuclear Armageddon, but not in the way that we typically think. And it actually strikes a very hopeful tone that maybe peace was possible. And in the real world, it actually was. If we remember our history in the mid-'80s, there was that era of glasnost, is what it was called, a kind of a thaw in the relations between the United States and, the Russia of the day, the Russia of Chernenko, Gromyko, Gorbachev, and, of course, the Gipper himself, Ronald Reagan. And I have not seen the movie. I'm a Dennis Quaid fan in general. I love a lot of his films, Frequency, Inner Space, The Big Easy, Suspect. Terrific actor, as we know, Right Stuff, even Tough Enough, where he plays a singing boxer. That was a weird movie. But I haven't seen the Reagan movie, and there was some acclaim for Dennis for his performance, so have to check that one out. But when it came time to make the film version of The Hunt for Red October, John McTiernan, now it would seem to be an obvious choice that, well, of course they picked McT. He went to SUNY Old Westbury. I think he got his undergrad at SUNY Old Westbury. So I don't know if he actually grew up on Long Island or if he just ended up going there because the arts program made him a good offer. That part, I don't remember that. But McTiernan is somebody who came on the scene like a thunderbolt. And this is something that isn't necessarily, it doesn't happen that often. So he did a movie in '86 with Pierce Brosnan, actually, of all people, called Nomads. It's not that good. The issue is more that the story wasn't particularly interesting or exciting. But if all you know is this is a major filmmaker, this is an Oscar caliber filmmaker who made, we could say, some of the best films in their respective genres over a period of, a number of years. This is a really talented filmmaker. Nomads got him the original Predator, where I would say his direction of that, now McTiernan is not James Cameron, but he is really close in terms of the skill that he showed, his command of the medium, his ability to figure out how to stage action and work with the editor to make everything just sing. And after Predator, he did the original Die Hard. So you're talking about knocking out all-time great kind of action/horror film in Predator. One of the best action movies to this day, one of the great action films ever made in the original Die Hard. And McTiernan did not direct Die Hard 2. It was Rennie Harlan, Gina Davis's ex-husband. But he came back for part 3, which I think is fantastic. The masterstroke of Die Hard 3 being that they got Jeremy Irons. He had won the Best Actor Oscar several years earlier. And man, is he fucking great. He's almost as good as, Alan Rickman playing his brother, Hans Gruber, Simon Gruber. But McTiernan just had an incredible eye. I shouldn't say had, but he doesn't work as much anymore. He had a scandal. He was involved in that private eye scandal in Hollywood where people were paying for information. It was really like a ridiculous scandal. It was the kind of thing where you say to yourself, why would someone even get involved? Sort of like the old Robert Klein joke about Spiro Agnew. And he said he remembered reading that Agnew got in trouble because he took like a $3,000 bribe. And Robert Klein said, doesn't it seem like he would be less of a crumb bum if he took more? Like you want it to be bigger, that you want it to be more exciting than Jesus. They were trying to dig up information. That doesn't seem that, like, why was it so important? But McTiernan, a great filmmaker, and the production for The Hunt for Red October, they tried as much as possible they try to put you right on the sub, because it deals with a nuclear-powered submarine, and a submarine that it moves with what is known in the film as silent propulsion. That this boat could literally dock at New York Harbor before anybody on our side knew that it was there. And so the book deals with the paranoia of the Cold War era and an idea that if we can't detect a ship by sonar, if the captain of the ship means to launch his missiles, as they say, they don't say missiles, they launch their missiles, but if he means to launch his missiles, we're all fucked, we're doomed, and we don't even have a chance. And that's basically the book, and the movie is pretty close to that. But in the film, because Sean Connery, spoiler alert, is playing the Russian sub-commander, and as one of my friends from Bev's gym, I kept making the mistake. He's a Russian sub-commander, but he is not Russian by birth. He is Lithuanian. And it's kind of how I guess they sort of describe Connery's barely disguised Scots accent, because, let's be honest, he sounds like Sean Connery. Yes, he gets to speak a smattering of Russian, and it's very clever the way the movie handles the switch from the characters on a Russian sub speaking Russian to speaking English. It was something, I believe that was McTiernan's idea, and it works brilliantly. Really, really smart idea. So Connery plays, the character's name is Marco Ramius, and he is a celebrated, lauded, legendary Russian sub-commander in the world of the book and the film. And I'm just going to focus on what we see in the movie. Now, obviously, the character of Jack Ryan is all over, not really just social media, but it's all over media with the movies. And you had, of course, Harrison Ford, and you had Ben Affleck, and you had the Jack Ryan Shadow Protocol, which I think was with Chris Pine. And then, I don't know if it was Shadow Protocol, but you had the Chris Pine movie with a younger Jack Ryan, and then you had the TV series with John Krasinski, like the earlier days of Jack Ryan. Well, this is the first media incarnation of Jack Ryan. And in the world of this film, Jack Ryan is played by Alec Baldwin. I understand Alec Baldwin, for a lot of reasons, is a very polarizing figure. I mean, in some circles, there's levels of polarization, of course. But one thing that very few people have argued is that he is not a very talented performer. Whether he's on stage, he was apparently, I didn't see it, incredible on the stage opposite Jessica Lange in Streetcar Named Desire. He is a commanding screen presence. We all remember, love him or hate him, everybody agrees that in Glenn Ross, he's just fucking incredible. Just walking out there in front of these other powerhouse actors from Spacey, Jack Lemmon, Alan Arkin, Ed Harris. And he just goes in there and just fucking cleans up. He is an alpha. He's incredible, I think, in the movie The Edge with Anthony Hopkins. That's a fantastic film, kind of underrated. He is just a dynamic performer. And in this era, Alec was on the rise still. He had been in Beetlejuice, although he doesn't really do very much in Beetlejuice. To me, Beetlejuice is memorable because of the other characters. Even Gina has more of a chance, in my opinion, to shine than Alec. But he was on the rise. He did a black comedy with Jennifer Jason Leigh just before shooting Red October called Miami Blues, which a lot of people really liked. It's kind of a cult film. But it showed that he had the ability to play serious, but he also had the ability to be funny. He's a very versatile performer. Obviously the matinee idol, good looks, all the Baldwin brothers, if we're being honest, and the commanding speaking voice. He was kind of made for the stage, and he ended up being a movie star. So his Jack Ryan is a man of thought, not a man of action. And for people who are used to the Jack Ryan with guns and fisticuffs and fighting, and even Harrison Ford in the two films that he did where he played Jack Ryan, there is more fisticuffs. But the Jack Ryan of Red October is a man of thought. Yes, he works for the CIA, but he is not an agent. He's not a field agent. He is a researcher. He is a guy, as he puts it, he writes books for the CIA. And he's the one who figures out there is something wrong, quote unquote, with Red October. That there were satellite pictures taken, and there were these doors on the boat that don't make sense. And what they realize is those doors allow Red October to propel itself and not get picked up by sonar. So the United States, we almost go all the way to the top. But the United States High Command, whether it's the Naval High Command or whether it is the general, Beltway, Washington, D.C., upper echelon of the political spectrum, everybody wants to know what's going on. And the Red October has gotten in the water and appears because we can't see it, it appears to be headed to the eastern United States. And the general consensus is that Marco Ramius, he lost his wife, he is losing his marbles or has already lost his marbles, and he means to attack. Jack Ryan is convinced that that is not correct, and he is willing to put his life and essentially everyone else's life on the line, that Marco Ramius loves the United States, quote unquote, and he does not intend to harm us. He wants to defect. And we don't know if Jack Ryan is off his fucking rocker here, but he is hanging on to the fact that the two of them met a number of years prior. And his perception of this guy is that he is as sane as anyone. And there is no scenario in which this guy is going to harm. He's just not going to do it. This is not how he's wired. So you meet a lot of great actors, all playing really interesting characters, such as the late James Earl Jones as one of the top naval commanders in the United States military, and another fantastic actor who, unfortunately, he was originally cast as Dr. Charles Nichols in The Fugitive, Richard Jordan. Richard Jordan is an actor that a lot of Gen Xers saw in a number of movies, but probably didn't, because its name, he doesn't look like a Richard Jordan. You know, sometimes you play this like Will Smith when he meets Tommy Lee Jones and he realizes that the guy's real name is Kevin, and he goes, you just don't look like a Kevin. You don't look like a Kevin. Richard Jordan didn't look like his name would be Richard Jordan. But Richard Jordan, nevertheless, which is a great name. It's a great actor's name. So he was in The Secret of My Success, a Gen X standard with Michael J. Fox and Margaret Whitten and the late, great also Fred Gwynne. And he was in a film with Kurt Russell in the mid-'80s called The Mean Season. He's a very interesting looking actor, kind of unconventional leading man looks, but he mostly played supporting roles. But in this film, Richard Jordan plays the Secretary of Defense. And it is such a great performance. In another version of The Matrix, he would have snagged a Best Supporting Actor nomination because he is phenomenal. I would argue that he plays the most fascinating character in the film because he's the highest ranking person in the world of U.S. government in this film that we meet. And his interpretation of the Secretary of Defense, yes, he is the top guy at this level of government, but he still sees himself as a politician. And he has a line of dialogue where when he realizes exactly what's going on and he's trying to figure out which action should I take as the Secretary of Defense, which leaves me the least vulnerable to criticism if this all blows up, no pun intended, if this blows up in our face. And he ends up actually dispatching not Agent Jack Ryan, book writer Jack Ryan. He ends up dispatching him to the USS Dallas, which is the ship that we commissioned in the world of the film to try to intercept the Red October. Are we going to engage them militarily? We're going to try to blow them out of the water? Or are we just going to help them defect? We don't know. And the movie does not really tell us exactly what we're doing. But Richard Jordan, Jeffrey Pelt, I almost forgot the name of the character, the Secretary of Defense. He has a moment of such incredible focus, and it is so accurate. You normally don't, in real life, politicians don't talk like this. So as Jack Ryan explains to him, here's where we are, here's what we're trying to do, and here's what I think is going on here. Ryan is convinced Ramius is defecting. He is not going to attack us. Don't provoke him, because we can't win this. We can't see the fucking ship. So Richard Jordan, even with the stakes, he gets a little smile in an almost fatherly way, because Alec was very young at the time, and Jack Ryan is presented probably, and he's already a family man, but he's presented as a man, I think probably early 30s, maybe he's in his mid 30s. But in real life, Alec was closer to 30, I believe. Richard Jordan's Jeffrey Pelt smiles at Alec's Jack Ryan. He goes, kid, I'm a politician, which means I'm a cheat, a thief, and a liar. When I'm not out kissing babies, I'm stealing their lollipops. If that isn't as accurate as what we know, the thought process of a politician in the United States, whether it's 1990, whether it's 1950, whether it's 2020, it doesn't matter. That is accurate, even if they would not verbalize it in that fashion. It's just a reality. You know, it's a tough business. We all know that. And so Jack Ryan is dispatched. He is sent to the USS Dallas, a pretty impressive special effects scene, I might add, where he pretty much gets airlifted and airdropped onto the ship in a kind of dangerous situation. And one of the ironies of this film, and it does a really good job of this, is for somebody who's not trained for combat or really trained for any of this shit in this story other than being able to detect, hey, there's something wrong with the doors of this sub. He sure as hell gets his hands dirty and almost, not to sound like a schmuck, but plant the seeds for all the movies where he's a man of action. Because when we meet Jack Ryan next in a Patriot Games, that was the one with Harrison, he already knows how to take care of himself. Suddenly he's swinging for the fences with his fists, and he's firing guns, and he's good with a knife. He's pretty much good with everything. Now, Sean Connery, Sir Sean, also the late great, one of the great movie stars in the history of Hollywood, and I recently saw when Gene Hackman passed away, Kevin Costner was, or maybe this was prior, but he was asked about some of the greats that he worked with. And he doesn't like, and this is to Kevin's credit, he doesn't like to say this one was the best, because then you get into better, and it's not really about better. He said, but if I'm asked which actor impressed me the most when we worked together, he said Gene Hackman. And then when he talked about Sean Connery, because they worked together in The Untouchables, and Sean won Best Supporting Actor Oscar, he said Connery had the bearing and the standing of a movie star. It's something that's very difficult to explain, and even when you see it, it doesn't necessarily become apparent immediately. But Costner is a huge fan of both of those guys. And at this particular time in this era, because Connery's career had kind of dipped, late 70s going into the early 80s, he started to do a little Charlton Heston kind of thing, where he was making movies where he said, man, he's just acting like he doesn't give a fuck, running around in a thong, and like Zardoz and all these weird movies. Outland, although Outland some people think is kind of undersold masterpiece. Then he did the Renegade Bond film in '83, Never Say Never Again, which I think is fantastic. I have that in my top 5 favorite Bond films. I love what Connery did. He hadn't played the role in more than a decade, I think in 12 years. And to Roger Moore's credit, he had no problem with Sean, because he didn't really steal the role. When I said Renegade, it's not considered canon. It's a Bond film, but it's a sort of out there, off the map James Bond film. But Connery did Name of the Rose, a pretty good mystery with a very young Christian Slater, and The Always Fire, F. Murray Abraham. That's good. And then he did Untouchables, won the Oscar, and not that long after the Oscar, he makes what I think is the most entertaining film of his career, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, with Harrison Ford. He did The Russia House with Michelle Pfeiffer just before shooting The Hunt for Red October. So this movie, Sean Connery's the star. His face is on the poster, not by accident. In terms of screen time, you would think that it would be Alec's movie, but everything in the story centers around Marco Ramius and what is he going to do. And Connery imbues Ramius with a certain level of humanity. It's very difficult to explain, but it's a very strong performance by Connery. This was not the kind of movie that was ever going to win any awards, but the intent all along was to put forth a first-rate representation of this, runaway best-selling book. And when the two, because it's almost a co-protagonist film, it's a little bit of an unusual structure. Again, as movie fans, we normally see, if we go to the cinemas, it isn't often that a movie has two protagonists. It happens. My favorite movie of all time, Chariots of Fire, is a 2-protagonist story, Eric Liddell and Harold Abrahams. We're following their narratives concurrently, and sometimes they intersect. In the world of this film, we follow Jack Ryan, we follow Marco Ramius. And this is not a never the twain shall meet. We know they're on a collision course of some sort. We just don't know what. And some of the other great actors in supporting roles, you have Scott Glenn as the commander of the USS Dallas. Man, he's good. He is really, his performance is under-repped in this movie. He's fantastic in this film. Courtney B. Vance, another kind of terrific actor from the day, worked with Clint in Space Cowboys. He plays one of the techs on the USS Dallas. Timothy Carhart, another really interesting actor, unfortunately was on the wrong end of a gun in Thelma and Louise. But Jeffrey Jones has a nice beard. And Sam Neill. Sam Neill is great in this film. He was another actor. New Zealand was on the rise. And if you didn't know, you would think that he really was Russian, because he nails the accent. He's so good. And his character, it's kind of a running gag. When we learn, sorry for spoilers, Sean Connery's not intending to blow up the United States. He just doesn't think that this ship should be out there because it's so dangerous. And cliche this may be, in the wrong hands, there's going to be an Armageddon situation. He doesn't say that phrase, but that's the implication. So it's not even so much that he thinks the United States is so great, but he knows they're not going to use the ship to blow up the Russians, and the Russians might use the ship to blow up the United States. So the Sam Neill character, when all the cards are on the table, Connery asks him, Creston, you'll be able to do what you like if all goes the way that we hope in the United States. You can live where you like, and have you looked it up? Where would you like to go? And Sam Neill says, I would like to live in Montana, and I'm going to marry a round American woman. Now, first time I saw the film, I'm 16, 17. The phrase a round American woman, even me with the pessimist attitude, I was giggling away. I never heard anybody use that phrase. I'm going to marry a round American woman. Okay, nicely done. And so his character wants to see Montana. That's his whole thing. It's, again, a running gag in the Sam Neill career. One of the signature phrases, if not the signature phrase, is, I would like to have seen Montana. In the movie The Horse Whisperer, his character is in Montana. I don't believe that was an accident. I believe that Robert Redford did that on purpose. The filmmaker for that movie was starred in it also. I think that Redford remembered Sam Neill pining away to live in Montana, and now I'm going to cast him as a guy living in Montana. That is pretty fucking cool. I remember Roger Ebert writing about that. I think he gave Horse Whisperer a better review than he normally would have because of the Sam Neill. Hey, look, he finally, he would like to have seen Montana. Here he is. Way to go. But The Hunt for Red October was a $200+ million gross. Now, this is a movie where the budget and marketing was around $30 million. So you do the math, it grossed 6.5 times production cost. By any metric, it was a humongous box office hit. Relatively speaking, it was as big a box office hit as the book had been in terms of sales and word of mouth and so many people. You know, my dad was not somebody who was ever ahead of the trends. He would pick them up along the way. He read all the John Grisham books when everyone else was reading them. He wasn't necessarily a trailblazer in that regard. And he read Hunt for Red October because everyone at work said, Al, you've got to read this. Dad never went for the hardcover. He waited for them to come to softcover. But The Hunt for Red October is a great thriller. It works as an action movie. It works as, you know, from the kind of Cold War era perspective and the legitimate fear, you know, and we talk about it now and there's a lot of upheaval. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's always a lot of uncertainty when it comes to the geopolitical sphere. We know that. But this movie really spoke to a particular time where things weren't, not to be negative, they didn't appear to be quite as dire. And yet the United States in this movie, they had their guard up. They were not screwing around, but they were also willing to be wrong. And it's an important thing that this movie gets into without using the phrase willing to be wrong. They think that Jack Ryan is not correct. But the USS Dallas, even if they are instructed, you got to shoot first. The character of Bart, I forgot his last name, the Scott Glenn character, he's not going to. And he even makes a joke when he agrees to Jack Ryan, don't shoot first no matter what. And he says, all right, Mr. Ryan, we just unzipped our fly. That's another one. That had me howling, even though it's a very tense moment in the film. The special effects, which are, there is a little bit of CGI with some of the submarine movement, but the action sequences, the effects work is real. It's practical effects. It works really, really well. And Alec doesn't have that many moments of levity or mirth. There is one moment in this film which I encourage you to check on YouTube, even if you don't feel like watching the movie, just this one moment where it's pretty much up to Jack Ryan to figure out there's been killings on the ship. There's a little bit of a 10 Little Indians kind of side plot going on. And Sean Connery's Marco Ramius instructs Alec Baldwin's Jack Ryan, you're going to have to find this guy. But be careful, because they're on a submarine, a nuclear-powered sub. Be careful what you shoot at. Most things in here don't react too well to bullets. And Alec kind of nods his head, and then when he goes off to look for the guy, he's got the gun in his hand, and somebody's shooting at him, and then he does a really good Sean Connery impersonation, better than what I just did, and he goes, yeah, like me, I don't react well to bullets. So right now, Hunt for Red October, I want to say is streaming on Paramount Plus, because this was a Paramount production, and it's been on Netflix, it's been on Amazon Prime. If you have to spend a couple of bucks to rent it, I don't think you do. I think you should be able to find it free. It might be on Tubi and Pluto, but this is a really good movie. The kind of first classic 90s Hollywood production where it was a big adaptation of a literary property, where the book was great and the movie, if it's not as good, it's really close. So well acted by the I mean, we could say it. It's an extraordinary cast. And they all hit their marks. Nobody is just there picking up a paycheck from James Earl Jones down. Everybody is great. There is just some stunning, gorgeous visuals towards the end of the film. And I really bought the chemistry between Saoirse and Alec. And not surprisingly, they became friends in later years. There's actually pictures of them, I guess about a dozen years ago at the US Open, the tennis championships in the city. They were sitting next to each other. And I know it's lame, but that's the kind of thing that I like to see. I imagine that sometimes when people work together as closely as those guys did for probably at least a month of their lives that they were shooting scenes together, you know, you form something of a lifelong bond, perhaps. And no pun intended, Bond, Sean Connery, that was accident, I'm sorry. But The Hunt for Red October, released on this day, 1990, an enormous box office hit, 35 years old today. Amazing. This has been episode 459 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending this chilly, windy Monday afternoon here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, peace.